Hello, everyone. Great to see there's still so many remaining on the last day. First of all, my thanks to GAA for inviting me one more time. I think it's my 4th time now, so I'm really glad to be here among this very knowledgeable crowd. So as the introduction went, let me see. Oh yeah, here we go. So I'm going to talk to you about the appeal of fish meal. In fact, it's our latest report. Let me go to that slightly already. By the way, I'm skipping the story about Rabobank. I think most of you by now know who we are. We're the world's largest bank in the world in the aquaculture, in agribusiness, and in aquaculture and fisheries. So, if you want to know more about that, you can email me. So, what did we do? We made a report about the fish meal industry. It's basically an observation of various trends and dynamics, and as an outsider we look at the sector and we try to come up with some implications of what is going on. So I actually initially wanted to bring the report with me. It turns out it's very heavy to carry. You could send me an email if you would like to have it. Instead of the report, I've brought some seafood maps. I'm going to put them at the desk right between the 2 doors. I got about 15 copies. So first one, first serve method. All right. So the first thing we looked at is the demand drivers. And the first one is really a no-brainer. I mean, aquaculture is growing in volume, and fish meal is one of the more important ingredients. So obviously, fish meal demand is growing as well. We heard from the speakers earlier on the first day that maybe the growth rate is declining somewhat. It might be 3 or 4%. But it doesn't matter, the volume growth is maintaining. More important is however, the changing of the way aquaculture is structured in terms of let's say what we call it, the industrialization of the sector. And the previous speaker from Brazil was a perfect example for what I was going to illustrate here, is that in fact land is even more scarce than any of the other inputs. And for reasons of biosecurity, et cetera, we need to move to a much more condensed aquaculture production. That means moving away from that type of extensive type of model, which is still quite common in many sectors. But one of the things that you need to do when you lose that area and the animals can no longer find feed in the environment, you probably need to put more feed. And obviously more feed also means more fish meal. And the next one is the development of new species, and particularly premium species. There are quite a few people in this room actually working on projects of new species, and traditionally new species have been one of the key drivers of aquaculture volume growth. The thing about new species is twofold. First, many of them are premium, and premium often also means they're carnivorous. That means they need fish meal. And secondly, we don't know that much about them yet. We're decades behind the research that was done in salmon and shrimp. So the initial formulations are going to be very high in terms of fish meal content. So that's yet another driver. But what's happening with supply? Well, supply isn't that great. The people from IFFO will come up with different ideas of what will happen this year. I tried to guess 2015. I mean, you know how it is with El Niño and Peru. It's a bit of a guess, that last one, but it doesn't matter. Overall, the trend is one of at least stable, and probably if you go back in time enough, of decline. So if you take 97 as a starting point, then we've lost 2 million tons, about 1/3 of fish meal production. Why we're losing it, and that's probably a presentation of a couple of hours on its own. Part of it has to do with the lower catch of some important small pelagics, maybe because they were caught too much in the past. In another case, it could be because some climate change, some species moving away from regions. But it also, to a large extent, has to do with direct consumption of fish. Pelagic species are a very important protein, especially in Africa, and many companies have invested heavily in also having a human consumption line, like Chilean jack mackerel, for example, or blue whiting. Now these products all depend quite a lot also on the human consumption markets. Nothing wrong with that. And then someone mentioned from the US presentation that trimmings are very important. Indeed, trimmings have actually, around the last decade or so, have cushioned quite significantly the decline of fish meal consumption, fish meal availability. Like they said, it's about 30% for them. I think globally it's about 1/3 of global fish meal supply now comes from trimmings. And it's a debate, I would say. I've had debates with people also in this room, whether or not trimmings will continue to provide an important source of fish meal in the future. Some even say it will be more. And I would argue that there's a good chance it will be less. I saw a pretty nice report from the pet food industry in Europe. We have 98 million cats in Europe, and they calculated a very conservative estimate that they consume about 0.8 kilograms of fish meal per cat. Now, all the trends in the pet food business are pretty similar to that in humans. They're also obese. 30% of them are obese, and people are, yeah, it's true. Apparently, I don't have one, but apparently it is true. And people are more and more conscious what they're feeding their cats, and this is becoming a global phenomenon. So, as the pet food producers no longer want to use any whole fish, obviously that goes for human consumption, then they will focus on the trimmings. That's a pretty competitive buyer you have there. And the other concept is the fifth quarter. Now, the fifth quarter is something that people in animal protein have been talking about for decades. And that's valorizing every single little bit of the animal. Actually, some of the sausages and hot dogs and other things that you get from pork, they're probably more valuable than the fillets. That's where the money is. That's why they always say the money is in the fifth quarter. In the fishing industry, seafood, aquaculture, we're not quite there yet. We still don't have hot dogs and that many hamburgers or pate from the livers. We still send quite a lot of the product into fish meal. And if you talk to the most successful processors, I bet if you rank them on margin, the ones that have the highest margin will have the lowest fish meal production, and they will utilize 100% of the fish. So again, another possibility that trimmings might not be the solution to fish meal supply. Then there is the competing species. Now, I have only 2010 here, unfortunately, but what the trend globally has been that aquaculture has taken over the supply of fish meal. So in the past, there were still people feeding it to poultry and to pigs. Those are more flexible animals, so we've been able to, let's say, take volume from them. Apparently now it's close to 80%, and it's even becoming an issue with shrimp absorbing more fish meal from salmon, for instance. So there are less and less others who can switch quicker to another protein source. And this is yet another topic that we could go on for a very long time, and I'm seeing time is sort of ticking over here. We talked about trimmings, but there's a plethora of alternatives that people such as EWAS could use to create the aqua feed. And each of these alternatives, if you look at them in detail, they all lack something. So either vegetable and nut meals that lack the right amino acid profile, they're not quite exactly there. The vegetable meal concentrate are a little bit better, but they're more expensive. Then there's a huge list of things that could happen still. You have the insect-based products and the yeasts and the algae-based products. All of these, none of them are yet scalable to the kind of level that we need. So maybe some will become reality soon, but the fact is that we still need fish meal and we're going to need it for quite a while. It's not going to disappear. Then, again, I knocked off this slide from EWAS. Well, they got one of mine, so we're even. And basically, you know, the top feed producers, they've done a fantastic job in reducing the fish meal or the marine ingredient content. They've gone from 60–70% in the 90s to close to 30% now, which is a great achievement. But every new incremental movement down from now, so let's say a future scenario of 10%, is going to be much, much harder. And that when you need some of these novel ingredients that I mentioned in the previous slide that are not available yet or not in the right amount. So the more you change to the lower level, the role that fish meal will play into the formulation changes. It's no longer a supplier of protein, but it's a supplier of something else, for example, palatability. So, putting it all together, if you see all the dynamics as a banker, you're analyzing the tightness of the market. To me, it seems that we're definitely not looking to, we're not going to say this fish meal is going to be extremely scarce, but certainly the current dynamics indicate that tightening of the marine protein market is likely, or at least it will continue as it has so far. That has a number of implications. By the way, first I wanted to say, fish oil, we've already experienced something very interesting that I observed back in 2012, and that was the decoupling of the fish oil price with its typical replacer, fish meal. So what does that mean? Until 2011, people were able to replace this product, but now it has its own life. It's no longer a commodity, so it's a decommoditization of the fish oil. And that has to do, of course, because in aquaculture we're using 80% of it, and it is very important, and it's very hard to replace. Now, my question was, how far away are we with this in fish meal? Well, I don't know exactly, but already now you can see some decoupling. So how long will it take for fish meal to become the strategic ingredient that fish oil is, and is no longer at all correlated to the soybean meal prices that for decades people always benchmarking the mean reversion between these two commodities. And if this does happen, then we have 4 sort of implications. Well, the first one is the implication for the aquafeed producers. Being the best at dealing with a low fish meal content, to create a formulation which is competitive and yet has the high performance. This requires a lot of R&D. A lot of R&D means a lot of scale. And the price that was paid for EWOS and also for Nutreco, I think, also justifies their capability and their knowledge and their skill in making these formulations. So clearly, the people who paid for these companies also agree that R&D is not exactly easy to replicate in this sector. And then we will see more consolidation. I think it will be hard for small companies to maintain competitiveness when this kind of R&D costs are necessary. For new species development, well, when fish meal was cheap, we could introduce all kinds of species. I wonder if salmon would have been this successful if fish meal was this expensive 30 years ago. So the species that will be successful from now on, I say, are the things like tilapia or pangasius that naturally don't need that much, or some species that are so expensive anyway that they can take a very high inclusion rate and still make the market work. Species like grouper or bluefin tuna or sturgeon. But some will end up in a dead end. Basically, the ingredients to farm a fish will be just too high, and there's not enough scale for R&D. I think Atlantic cod is one of these products, although we could discuss for a very long time that there's many other issues with Atlantic cod. And I've got 2 more. The other implication is for the pelagic harvesters. If we're saying that fish meal and fish oil are becoming these strategic ingredients, then we might think that there could be strategic interest of countries and companies that want to control this asset from because they find that it's very important for them strategically. And the last and final one is that given these kind of price levels, there will be more and more attention towards those innovators out there that are looking for new options, novel ingredients, the ones that are trying to figure out something from algae or from insects or from krill. They might see their business models become profitable sooner rather than later. So yeah, that was it. I think I only missed my time a little bit. Thank you, guys.